All right, so I mentioned in the video with a walk around of the S-160 how the rear axle needed to be resealed. So I had a wheel cylinder going bad, so I had to take that off. And in doing so, I had to take the drum off, the hub and everything, and I found a bunch of water in the gear oil, which tells me that this gasket has now deteriorated to the point that it's letting rainwater in. The thing is, I could replace the wheel cylinders, you know, clean up the drums, repack the bearings and all that stuff, but I don't like to take stuff apart more times than I have to. I like to overfix stuff and just go the extra little distance on these projects. So with that said, what I'm doing here is I have the truck jacked up. I have both drums off. Also, that was a axle seal nut that I had to cut off of the Dremel. That was another thing. So I'm just going through this axle right now and just fixing everything I possibly can. Basically doing a whole rebuild, other than I'm not messing with the diff. I'm not messing with the ring and pinion depth or anything. I am gonna replace the pinion seal though. So right now I just got it off the jack stands and it is now on this super sketchy tower of wood blocks. But since the truck is so heavy, it's actually pretty stable. I got the front wheels blocked. The truck is in gear and the front axle is engaged. So that's how I'm keeping the front still. Anyway, I'm gonna get this, basically right now all I have to do is drop the U-bolts, drop the nuts off the bottom of those plates, and this axle will basically just drop. Either way, I'm gonna get this thing all torn apart and I'm gonna throw it in the back of the KV2 over there, take it home to the garage, and start tearing this thing down and cleaning it up. So. And just like that, we're back in the garage. I've got the axle mostly torn down. I still have to take the brakes off this end. I got the diff mostly cleaned up. And then outside the garage, I have the leaf springs, because I figured as long as I'm doing it, I might as well do it all. So, you know, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So I'm going to go through this. I'm cleaning up the axle tube and the diff. I think my plan of attack is to get it all cleaned up, reinsert the diff, get it set, and the gasket all situated. And then once that's all set, then I'll go through the whole axle and POR 15 it. I just did a gas tank. There's a gas tank over here. My garage is a mess. I've got a million projects going on at the same time. That's a gas tank for the S-160. I just restored that. It's lined with POR 15, and it went so well that I'm going to coat this thing with the regular POR 15, not the fuel tank liner, obviously. So anyway, what I'm doing right now is I am pulling the brakes off this end, and then I'm going to go through this entire thing and just get it down to bare metal. I've been working on it a little bit. See? So I'm gonna get the whole axle looking like that or better. Once I get it all nice and clean, free of oil, anything, I'm going to put the diff in, lower it down with the cherry picker. The reason I'm doing it before I paint everything is because I have to replace the pinion seal. And I find if you're lifting a diff by that yoke, you can sometimes kind of stretch out that pinion seal and it'll just start leaking again. So I want to get it over here onto the axle, all bolted up and everything. And then I'll take the yoke off and replace the pinion seal. So a lot of talking, just gonna get to it. All right, I've been wire brushing on this for several hours, and I've been soaking it in oven cleaner for a couple days. Same with the differential here. And so now I'm about to pressure wash this stuff. Here's the axle vent. It's pretty plugged up, so I'm gonna power wash that too. So I got it in a spare vise, and it's part of a World War II winch for the M5. So anyway, this is the stuff I'm gonna be pressure washing off all this oven cleaner and little bits and stuff, and see if we can't get it pretty much down to bare metal before we had to put acid on it to etch it for the POR 15. Okay, of course, so the battery died on the camera, but right now I'm going through, everything's cleaned up, and I'm going through and putting OSHVO on this, which is phosphoric acid mixture. So what that's going to do is it's going to acid etch all the steel, and then we're going to clean it all off with the power washer. The grinding finally is done. We're going to clean it all off with the power washer there because it just rinses off, and then we're going to start hitting this with a POR15. All right, well, the phosphoric acid is etching the steel right now. I've just flipped over all the leaf springs, and what I've done here with the flap wheel is, now if you were paying me to do this to your truck, or if I was a machinist, I would say that I've established a slight chamfer on the end of this. But since these are mine for my truck and I'm just some guy doing this in my driveway, I'll just say that I rounded off the ends, because these stack up, these go on top and then below it, and these press up against the bottom of these here. And what we're trying to do is make sure that this is smooth as possible, and then with these ends it's not digging into the bottom, because you can see the shadow of where that was, where that fits. So riding off the tops, you don't have to do it to the bottom because that doesn't ride against anything. And we're gonna put the OSHVO on top of these now, and then when they've been etching for a while, then we'll spray them off with the pressure washer, and then move on to the POR15 when they're dry. Man, the cleanup on all this stuff just took forever, days actually. So now we're finally about to the point of actually putting this back together and getting down to fixing the problems that this axle had. All right, so got everything etched with acid now. I went around with a fine wire brush and I cleaned up all this. And I'd done the same on the differential here underneath. And I went through underneath here with acetone and got it all just as one last fail safe for any type of like residual oils or something from me cleaning and wire brushing it again. The wire brush could have had oil on it or something, so I like to go over it with acetone. I'm about to hit this with acetone real quick. And the socket for that I'm going to use on the bolts to drive this in, because those bolts I've actually now hit them with acid as well, because I'm going to paint it all with POR15 when it's all together. First things first, I have my gasket and test fitted already. Perfect fit. What I'm going to do is smear a really thin coat all around here, and then put this down and then smear another thin coat on top of it there. So I'm not having to go underneath the differential, and so when I set it in, it's just there. Now if I didn't have the gasket, then I'd obviously do like a bead and make a gasket with it, but since I'm just using silicone to seal it, we're gonna go extra thin. All right, so the gasket's on there, silicone's on both sides. Now I have to drop this pumpkin into there. All right, so it's got these raised parts for 2 longer bolts. So I'm going to use those to basically align it. So I'm just going to put those in right now. I've got this on the cherry picker, obviously. I'm just going to lower it down, get the ring gear inserted into these indents, and then hopefully I can just basically line it up slowly. I was thinking about taking this pumpkin out to where the truck is and installing it in the axle out there, just because everything is so heavy when it's put together. But the thing is, it's just so much easier to get a good seal on the differential doing it this way that I thought it was worth putting it together in the garage and then taking it out to the truck. Just gonna snug these up real quick. All right, that's just snugged up now, so I'm going to let that cure for a little while, and I'll come back and torque it, and I'll pull out the seal and felt, replace that. So it's been a couple hours for the silicone curing up here, so I think I can start torquing down the bolts from the differential case of the housing here in the axle tube. And the torque spec for these is 50 to 70 foot-pounds. And I had in my head coming out here that I was gonna torque them up to 60 before I even looked at the torque spec. So I'm gonna stick with that. So I'm gonna go around and torque them all to 50, then take them up to 60. All right, so that's 50. I think it's a little off kilter. Let's balance better here. And let's go up to 60. All right, so now that we have this housing torqued down, we have to take the pinion nut off and the yoke and then the seal housing, because we have to change the pinion seal and felt. So with the problems that this axle had, that's the first leak, the differential gasket. So that's changed, that's addressed, so we got to do this one. This Milwaukee Impact is the coolest ever. And that may look like felt, but that's just crap. That's just oil and dirt. Once I get the seal housing off, these being torqued correctly is how you adjust the bearing preload. When we put it back together, we have to make sure they're torqued down correctly. So that's it. That's the seal housing. This seal and that felt, those are the two things that we need to take out right now. The rest of this stuff, we'll clean this up a little bit, but we're not gonna mess with this at all. We're basically just gonna, I'll probably just throw some grease in here, just as long as I'm here, because it's open and this differential's been drained of oil. But other than that, We don't mess with any of this stuff. I'm gonna clean all of this off, all this dirt and oil, and then I'll actually acid etch this and then clear it off with acetone one more time after installing the new felt and seal. Okay, so we're at my $40 anvil right now, my $40 piece of I-beam drop. I'm actually using it for a sheet metal anvil. That's my plan. Anyway, it was my seat and now it's my table. I got the felt and the seal out of this thing. So now I gotta replace them. So I have the replacements right here on the RA25 National 450103. National felt 5M805. Felt goes in first and then the seal goes in. So I gotta find a seal driver or something to drive it in there with. I bet I can get in there pretty good with a punch. This actually was a wheelbarrow axle and it's actually one of my favorite punches now. So I'm looking in at where the felt needs to be pressed down in there. So it still has to go down a little ways. And if you're actually using a punch to drive in a seal, it's better to use a bigger punch than a smaller one because a smaller one will start dimpling it in there. You just go a little bit tighter. You want it snug on that felt so it's held in place. So there it is. I've got the felt. It's just pressed in there. It's not moving anywhere. This is up to personal discretion, obviously, but I think it's best to moisten, just dab some gear oil on the felt. And before I put the yoke through here, I will run some gear oil around that nitrile seal too. In the meantime, the seal housing, before I even put it back on, I'm going to go through and re-etch it with the phosphoric acid. And then when I paint it, I'll actually paint this first and then I'll put the yoke in and tighten it down. All right, so about to put the seal housing back on. And just because this whole unit has been taken apart for over a week now, I'm just gonna put some gear oil through this bearing just to make myself feel better, basically. And by the time we flip it around, some of this will have gone through everything. Ooh. Okay, so a little bit right here. Not a big deal, but I have gone through and around this thing and hit it with acetone once. I'm about to get some acetone on my rubber gloves, get them cleaned off, free of oil. And then we got a little bit of lube here that I want to get off of this. So now the seal housing, going through with acetone, cleaning everything off of it. I'm just gonna put a thin layer of silicone around this thing, just because this seal housing is a little beat up. All right, so these 6, this is a pinion cage for the carrier. The torque spec on these is 1 to 120. So I think I'm gonna start it out at 90 and then take them up to 110. Here's 90. There's a neighbor kid coming home from something. You know, it's a Pinion. Let's take it to the top of the torque spec. 120, here we go. Yeah. All right, well, I'm here. I've got my PR15. The first time I'm using this as chassis paint, so I'm stoked to try it. I've gotten everything absolutely as clean as I can get it. I've got my bolts all torqued down. Everything's ready to go. This is etched and cleaned. You know, we put that on the last step and it got oily. So I've gone over everything with like brake cleaner and acetone, and it's been etched. So here we go. So addressing the things that were problems with this axle, I put brakes on the other side. You can see the wheel cylinder, the top wheel cylinder from here. I've got the shoes and the springs and everything all set up over here. I just have to connect all the lines. The differential gasket was blown, the pinion seal was leaking. Those have both been replaced. So now I have to deal with 2 more things. Wheel cylinders, brake setup on this side, and it had an axle seal nut go bad, and so I'm gonna have to go through and true up this thread and make sure everything is good on that. But first, we're gonna start with the brakes. On the RA25, it has these adjusters that you would use a screwdriver or something coming in through this little slot. It's got these like permanent riveted on adjusters. So you have this star gear right in here, and then you have this guy. The star gear just basically floats in there, and this, as you turn it, goes up and down through here, pushes out on the shoe that way to adjust it out. And then there's also, you have a clip like this. This is a ratchet. So it goes like this, and it, you know, interlocks with the teeth of the star gear to lock it in place. And it has this little screw. The thing is, they get dirty. They get corroded, everything. So what I've done is I've taken it all apart. Everything's clean. Everything's ready to go back in. Got these. Now, I've gone through here obviously with POR 15 and then top coated it. And so now I have some paint residue inside the adjuster threads. So pull this stuff out of here. I'll just clean up these threads a little bit. The thing about these adjusters is that they are threaded to specific sides. So the two from the other side will not work on this side. I'm just running it in backwards just to make sure the thread works. All right, so now that I have that all cleaned out and I know it's gonna work, I'm gonna dab a little bit of anti-seize inside those threads. Then to thread this thing in here, you come from the bottom here, you drop that star gear right in its path, and you use the star gear and just feed it up. And I like to get it so it's up, flush to the end of this. You don't really want it to go past that. Let's clean up some of this anti-seize before it gets to be a problem. If you've never done anything with anti-seize, be warned, a little bit goes a long way. So I'm gonna get it up to the end here, so it's just flush with this. Clean the excess anti-seize off of it. Now, to get the ratchet on there. This is a ratchet. You got this little self-tapper that holds it in. It's got a flathead screw thing on it, but it's a 1/4 inch hex head. So that's how we're gonna deal with it. You wanna make sure you got it going in there straight into its old threads. And the best way I've found to do that is to just get the first threads in it right there, then get a socket on it and push on it real hard so it doesn't try to shift on you. So there's the adjuster. So the reason you don't want to come past here from flush is because this is right where the wheel cylinder sits. So let's put one of those in. Now there's two different kinds of wheel cylinders that go on here, and the difference being their inlets. There's a line inlet and then there's a banjo fitting inlet. I believe that all of those that use the dual wheel cylinders use the banjo fittings, and then the line fittings for the singles, I believe. I could be wrong. But anyway, this is a dual banjo fitting. Guy just pops right in there. Now on the on these wheel cylinders, let's see here, I'll get this thing off. I've had to grind down this socket just to fit in here. This was giving me a lot of trouble out in the junkyard when I was saving this truck. Something to keep in mind. Okay, so wheel cylinders on there. Put these fittings on here. Shove it in there. I like to just push it up against this spindle and push that rubber molding right to where that thing starts to flare out. And just pop it back on there. All right. Okay, so putting the shoes on. This is what the shoes look like. You can see the top and the bottom are different. They're not symmetrical. You need this cutout to go by the adjuster. So it's locked into the push rod for the wheel cylinder here, going into the adjuster, and then it's going down to the bottom anchor. Can't see that right now, but anyway, you had to put this bolt through here, this anchor bolt. Comes through there, washer, crown nut. Now, you don't want the crown nut torqued down in there, but you want it tight enough that it holds the thing against there. So now we'll show you how to put the springs on. So the springs go to 2 anchors. Here's a top anchor. There's a trick to doing this. Take a Phillips, put the Phillips through there. Here's the anchor pin. You're gonna get it so that one of the back groove is setting right on that pin. You're just gonna pull it out. Boom, there she is. You just do that with the other one. Since this axle is sitting on jack stands, let's see here, I'm gonna show you. It's sitting on jack stands that are sitting on the spindle, and on the no man's land of the spindle that just sits between the 2 wheel bearings. So right now the axle's upside down, so I want to do that other spring, so I just grab this thing and just real easily, don't want to go slamming it around, but boom. So now the other spring for this guy is real easy. Phillips. The bigger the Phillips, the easier this is, or at least it's safer. Boom. I'm gonna get that other shoe on there. Okay, so this is the last big hurdle we've got to deal with on this axle. This thread right here, it has a nut that goes on here, which goes up against the bearing, and then it has a lock washer with the tabs that you bend down, and then it has an axle seal nut. And the axle seal nut on this thing at the start of the trip of bringing the truck from California somehow pushed one of the tabs back. The rubber seal caught on the axle and it unscrewed it, and then it bound up into the end of the axle shaft. We figured it out, we took the thing off. The thing had actually fused itself to this, and so the actual axle nut had stayed where it was and kept the wheel bearing in place. And what we did is that we got around it and we tied some thick wire in here just to hold back on that lock nut, just to hold pressure on the axle nut there. However, the seal nut was completely destroyed, and I ended up having to cut it off with a Dremel like I had showed you at the start of this video. And then I actually took a socket and I worked the axle nut back off. Sorry for my halting way of speaking. I'm trying to think and talk at the same time, which rarely works. The thing I'm up against right now is I want to make sure that this thread is good. Now, running the axle nut back over it might have worked, but I haven't messed with it since, so I'm trying to run this nut on here, and immediately I'm having problems with it. There's some rough thread right in here, and this very first thread here is all gnarled up. That's pretty much the only thing I can see on here. So what I'm gonna do is just take my time and run this file up along this thread, each side, get it worked down so it's coming to a point like the rest of these are, nice and clean. So I'm just gonna work on this for a while, and just with small steady stuff like this. I mean, it's possible I could try this with a Dremel and a disc, but I'm almost wondering if I would be messing up more stuff than I'd be actually fixing. So I'm just gonna do this for probably the next 30 to 45 minutes and see if I can't get it to be, you know, so I can run that nut on there without it binding up.